family for? Oftentimes, especially in the church, we think of the nuclear family. You got your husband, you got your wife, you got your 2 kids, your 3 kids, and that's what we envision when we think about it. But when you look across our culture, and even across our county, you see a lot of families that may not be put together in the traditional sense. They're very creative. You have stepchildren, you have stepbrothers, stepsisters, you have widowed and widowers, you have people who are single and been single their whole life. There's a lot of different definitions of what family is and what family looks like. And so this week, as we reflect on Family Week, and today, as we look through our Bible and reflect on the family, it's important for us to answer that question. What is a family for? What is the purpose of a family? Well, as we get started, let's go back to very basic things, and let's look at the 3 things which God created. This is after creation, but you see the 3 institutions of man that God has created. The 3 of them are the family, government, and the church. And we just had read to us from Jeremy about the creation of the family. In Genesis 2:18, God looks at Adam and he notices something. Adam is created perfectly in the image of God. God breathed upon him and imbued him with spirit. But as God looks at Adam, he recognizes something is missing. And he makes a statement. It's a statement we're going to look at a little bit later in the lesson, but it's an important statement. It is not good that man should be alone. It's not good that man should be alone. Therefore, I'm going to make a helper for him. And so you see in that passage where he takes the rib from Adam and he creates from that rib Eve and creates the perfect person that matches Adam in every way. They are a marriage made in heaven, if you will. And so you now have Adam and you now have Eve, and you see they begin to have children, and you see that perfect family which is put together, and that perfect family which is created. And as you and I think about that, it reminds us about how families really are, in many ways, made in heaven. And as you read through our Bible, you read through the passages talking about the joy and the beauty of family. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, Proverbs chapter 5 and verse 18, as he's trying to tell his children about how to have a successful, a happy, and a fulfilled life. He says, you need to enjoy the wife of your youth. Enjoy the family that God has given you. Love your children and enjoy every stage that they're in. Even though some stages are harder than others, treasure the time that you have. Enjoy that time that you have that's there. It's created by God. It's good. It is very, very good stuff to have. Now, as you go to Genesis chapter 4, you see whereas Cain is thrown out of the garden, he has a son named Enoch. Enoch builds a city, or Cain builds a city, and names it Enoch after his son. And from that point starting, you see the second institution created by God, and that's government. And you begin seeing cities which are created by Enoch and by other people. Eventually, as you get to Genesis 10, you begin reading of great families, and the name is changed to nations. And you begin reading about Assyria and Egypt and Babylon and Rome and the places in Greece. And we see where government begins to be created. Now, as you read in Romans chapter 13, 1 through 7, you see that government is created by God. Now, we may take a step back at that and say, Lord, you may not have seen our government. It doesn't look like it's created by God. And especially if you look at some of these governments across the world, you may say, I don't know. But Romans 13 tells us the government is created by God. The government does not bear the sword in vain. It fulfills God's purpose. And so government, both good and bad, serves the purpose of God. It serves the purpose that God has intended for it. And then, of course, we see the church. But as you look at the family, and as you look at government, and as you look at the church, one thing we've got to recognize is this. Even though all 3 are created by God, even though they have a holy beginning, all 3 are corrupted by people. All three of these institutions are perverted by mankind. We take that which is perfect, we take that which is good, and oftentimes we create things that are not good. And we create things that are hurtful instead of being helpful. I'll give you an example. Going back to Genesis 4, you see Adam and Eve, that perfect family, right? And we oftentimes think in a church, oh, we got to have that perfect family. And we think in our minds that every family is perfect. Well, notice that very first family created by God, Adam and Eve, they have a son, Cain. They have a son, Abel. What happens? The two boys get into a fight. One murders the other, and then that one is ostracized and thrown out and made to leave. Even the very first family that God created was a family that had issues and a family that had problems. We go a little bit later, about 20 chapters later, and you begin reading about Abraham, the father of all the faithful. And as you read through Romans 4, you see that this man is the example of what it means to have faith in God. So surely he had a perfect family, right? Well, he had a wife named Sarah. He had another wife, kinda, named Hagar. You see Ishmael, you see Isaac, and you see the trouble going on with the stepchildren. You see the problems going on there, and eventually Hagar and Ishmael are thrown away, thrown out, and sent to live on their own. And you see the family conflict that's there. And it continues on. You got Jacob, you got Esau. You go all the way to David, a man after God's own heart. And you see this man who is pure, who is righteous, who writes a good portion of the book of Psalms. And you see his heart is right exactly where it needs to be, right? But let's talk about his family for a second. He married Michal in order to gain power, and she was a beautiful woman. Time came where she was embarrassed by him, and she left him. There he is without his wife, and he finds Bathsheba, and he goes into sin. And you begin looking at his children, and you see Amnon and Tamar, and you see the corruption and the perversion there. And Absalom comes, and he murders Amnon. And then Absalom rebels against his father. And as you begin studying through David, you see, man, this guy may be after God's own heart, but how can you have a worse family life than what David had? You see, even good people sometimes have rough family backgrounds. Even good people sometimes have a family that doesn't seem to be blessed or doesn't seem to follow after God. And then we come to the church. And as you and I look at the church, we see across our community, there's many churches which don't follow God's pattern as far as worship. They don't follow God's pattern as far as salvation. They don't follow God's pattern as far as living. But you see, the church is blessed because the church is family. Let me explain that to you. How does Paul define the church? Look over there in Galatians 3 and verse 28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, but we are all one, Paul would say, in Christ Jesus. I'll give you another passage. Luke 8, 19 through 21, Jesus sitting there with all of his disciples. His mother and his brothers come to take him home because they've decided he's crazy. And as they come to take him home by force, Jesus says something that's very interesting. He said, look around this room. The people who are in this room, these are my brothers. The ladies who are in this room, these are my mothers. And what he says is, this is my family. We see there an identity of the church. The church is more than just believing right. And the church is more than just doing right. God created us as a people, as a called out people, to be family, to be there for each other, to show love one to another, to support one another, to help one another on that journey to heaven. Now, you remember, we looked at the very beginning of the lesson, Genesis 2:18, right? And what's that passage say? It's not good that man should be alone, so I will make a wife, I will make a person helpful to that person. All right? Now go into New Testament, and as we go over the New Testament, look there in 1 Corinthians 7, and look in verse 7. And notice what Paul says. In that passage, he says, it is good to be single. Paul says, I think it is a good idea to be single. Now, we look at that and we think, well, that's kind of weird. Because Jesus, or God, in Genesis 1 is saying, hey, marriage is preferable. Marriage is important. And here's Paul in the New Testament saying, I think being single is a better situation. Now, that's not a conflict. And you see in the New Testament, there's nothing in the world wrong with marriage. And matter of fact, marriage is blessed by God. And you see that in 1 Corinthians 7 as Paul discusses it. You see in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 and 5, the marriage bed is honorable to God. And God blesses marriage. And you read in our Bibles in Ephesians 5, 22 through 33, the relationship of a husband and a wife and a parent of children reflects the relationship of Christ and the church. It's a holy institution. So what is it Paul is saying there when we look at 1 Corinthians 7? Paul is telling us that the church is for every single one of us. You may be widowed. You may be a widower. The church is for you. You may be single all your life. You may be divorced. The church is a place where you belong. You may be married and just be newlyweds, or you may be married for your entire life. And you may have been married for longer than you were ever single. The church is a place for you. And that's an atmosphere. That's an attitude that we must continually build up, that we must create in the church. We are the family of God, and we are here one for another. And so as you and I think about what a family is for, think about not just that biological family, which we see in Genesis 2, but also think about the church and the aspect of the church, the Lord's church, being a family. We are brethren. We are related to Jesus, heirs of God. We are here one for another. Let's go to our next slide, though, and talk for a few moments about what a family is for. What is the purpose of family? Well, you see three things here. First and foremost, it creates identity. It lets you know who you are. Secondly, it provides a measure of protection. And it's a place where you learn values. You see, in many ways, a family defines you. Not always, and sometimes you can go against your family. But in many ways, a family defines somewhat of your relationships. It talks about where you start. You look at many congregations, you see a strong element of family, right? A lot of people here who are Joneses, a lot of people here who are Phillips, a lot of people here who perhaps are Rudds, or, we could look at a lot of last names which go there. That in some ways, that's your identity. As you grow up, that's the people that you grow up around. That's the people you go on vacation with. That's the people who you're around at your house. It's your identity. Some of us have a similar body type. Perhaps you have similar eye color. Perhaps you have similar hairstyles or whatever else it may be. It's an identity of who you are. And so as you and I look at ourselves, we see family defines us in many different ways. We see that in the Bible. As Matthew chapter 1 opens up, you begin seeing where Matthew is describing to us Jesus. He's describing to us Jesus from an Old Testament or a Jewish context. 3 groups of 14. He goes in genealogy all the way back to Abraham. And what he's saying is, I want to tell you who Jesus is. He is the son of Abraham. He is the son of David. And he goes through, and that identifies who he is. Luke does the same thing in Luke 3, but he goes all the way back to Adam. And as he goes through that list of women, and as he goes through that list of different people, he's identifying to us who Jesus is. In the same way, we see that sometimes family identifies us. Now, there's a negative way of looking at that. In Exodus chapter 14 and verse 18, God there says something kind of interesting. He says, I want you to see that the effects of sin will last for the 3 or 4 generations. And sometimes we see that in our culture. There will be generational poverty in some families because of the actions of parents or because of the actions of grandparents. It is very difficult in the home in which kids are raised to improve their lives greatly. Sometimes with alcohol, sometimes with drugs. Even though the children aren't guilty of that sin, the children have to deal with the consequences of their mommy or their daddy abusing certain things. And so sometimes family can be an identity that we need to break from, that we need to change, that we need to try to be different. Many homes that have abuse come from homes where there was abuse. And in those cases, we've got to break those chains. We've got to break that identity. What's a family for? Well, a family provides values. In Proverbs 22 and verse 6, it says, train up a child the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. You learned quite a bit about who God was by what your parents did and by what your parents said. Many people are converted into the church at a later age. But many of your preconceptions come from the family in which you were raised. And so many of your values, many of your ideas come from that family in which you came from. Many years ago, when we lived close to New Orleans, I remember one of my younger sons, Nathan, came to me and he's like, Dad. And I said, what? What is it? And he said, why can't we like the Saints? The Cowboys have lost my entire life. And I thought to myself, how bad can it be that the Saints are better than the Cowboys? You know, how bad do the Cowboys have to be? Well, why did he think he had to like the Cowboys? Well, first, he's a Christian. But going beyond that, his parents, his dad, always watched them on TV, thought that was really important. And so the kids grow up learning that sort of thing. Now, Matthew is about to be 21, and the Cowboys' last Super Bowl was 6 years before he was born. So it's tougher for them than it is for me. But you see those values which are there, not just talking about sports teams. What's important in life? Is church important? You learn that from the family in which you grew up. Is it important for a husband to treat his wife with respect, for a wife to love and submit to her husband? You learn that in the home in which you grow up. Is it important to work for a living, to provide for yourself? In many ways, you learn that in the family in which you grow up. And so there's a lot of values which are imbued there. One of my favorite passages, which is somewhat unique, not many people really go back to this passage when they talk about their favorite verses, but for me, it's 1 Kings 2. David has reached the end of his life. He knows he's about to leave and go to eternity. And as he's getting ready to go there, Bathsheba makes sure that Solomon's going to be the next king. And so he calls Solomon in. And as he's talking to Solomon, he has some things to say. He says, first and foremost, son, you got to be a man. Solomon, I want you to be a man. Secondly, Solomon, I want you to follow God. Put him first in every decision that you make. And thirdly, you need to finish exactly what I started. You need to finish the things that I've done. Now, I think that's a pretty good aspect of what parents need to teach their children, of the values we need to bring across. We need to teach our young men what it means to be a man in 2020, what it means to be a man, what masculinity looks like in our culture and our society. We need to teach our young ladies what it means to be a woman, what it means to, what the role of women is, how women need to be. We need to teach that. It's very important to train our children up to know what role they play in life. it's vital for us to pass on the values of Christianity. Follow the Lord with all your heart. Don't just go to a building out of habit. Don't just come to church because that's what you've always done. But train your children to love God, to have a relationship with Jesus, to know the Word of God, and to treasure the things that are in that book. And then train your family to finish and go beyond where you've been. Whether that be financially, whether that be educationally, whatever it may be, train them to live better, to have it better than you had yourself. That instilling of values is so very important. And the third thing which we look at is this aspect of protection. 1 Timothy 5:8, if anyone does not provide for his children, let him know that that person is worse than an infidel. You need to make your home be a safe place, a place where they're provided for, a place where they are taken care of. So often, parents get so busy, they don't pay attention to what their kids are looking at on the internet. So often, we're so worried about our kids being socially popular that we're not keeping up with who their closest friends are. And sometimes we forget how dangerous this world can be. Protect your kids. Protect your family. Protect yourself in these things. What's a family for? Well, it's for these three things, these three purposes. And so let's look at how we can improve our family. When we look at this aspect of improving our family, here's the question. What identity are you providing? When kids grow up in your home, who are they? When you leave this earth, whether it be today or whether it be in decades, how will you be remembered? What identity are you creating in your home? We oftentimes will speak about how those of our number who have gone on to their reward leave a legacy. And those who have been here a while can look at certain pews and we remember where folks sat because they were always here. They left an identity. Will people remember us? And when they do, what will they remember? When your kids grow up and move out, what will they remember about Thanksgiving, about Christmas, about birthdays? What traditions will be there? And if your home wasn't exactly what you want it to be, now's the time to begin to create an identity, to create what you want people to remember you as. What about values? What values do you imbue upon others? When people see you, do they see the benevolence and the kindness which is there? Are your kids growing up learning to love without strings? To love regardless of how they're treated? Are kids learning to love the Lord? What values do you instill in your children? And of course, when it comes to protection, how do you protect or nurture your children? Now, you may have watched on television some of these nature and science shows. And what you'll notice is when a giraffe is born or when, some animal is born, they come out of the womb and in just 10, 15 minutes, they're able to walk. And most animals within a day are pretty self-sufficient. If you grew up on a farm or if you've been around a farm, you've noticed how cattle and goats, many times when they're born, as soon as you help that happen, those calves know to follow their mama. They know kind of things to do pretty quickly. Of all the creatures that God created, there's only one creature that can't take care of itself very quickly at all. People. A child, when it's born, is not going to learn to walk in a day. It's going to be years. I remember one time being beside a man. He just had his first child, and he was holding it for the very first time. And he looked up at me, and he said, "How long is it going to be till his eyes open up?" I was like, "That's cats, not people." He had a long ways to go. But children are not able to walk for a good while. Children are not able to talk for a few years, and then they never quiet, are they? Why did God create us that way? Because every one of us need to be nurtured. Every one of us need to be loved. And the Lord made it where the first few years of our life, we were going to be held. We were going to be fed. We're going to be changed. We need that nurture. We need that protection. We need these things. And so when we think about what a family is for, recognize you need family. Recognize you need to be around people. Recognize it is not good for man to be alone. Now, the first place God created for that to happen is the family. But that doesn't always work the way it should in some families. Another place God created that protection and value instilling is government. But man, sometimes government messes that up. But it should always be present in the church. The church is a place where you're loved. The church is a place that instills value. And the church is a place where when we work together, we protect one another on our journey to heaven.